All right, good afternoon and welcome to the Brand Storytelling live stream for April 22nd, 2020. I'm Drew Parkhill. Thanks for being with us. The live streams air every Wednesday at 12 p.m. and 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Our mission is to deliver the most timely and relevant information for our community of brands and their storytelling partners. These shows are designed for you, so please let us know how we can best serve the community by suggesting future topics and guests that would help you now as well as into the future. Drop me a line. I'm Drew at BrandStorytelling.tv if you have any advice or suggestions for future streams. I'd like to hand it off to Brian Kamenetzky, a sports writer and radio host in Los Angeles, contributing to outlets including LA Times, ESPN, ESPN the Magazine, and The Athletic. Brian, take it away.
Thanks everybody for joining us. For those of you who were here last week, we had a really great conversation about esports, sort of broadly the entire ecosystem and how current circumstances are playing out and influencing the development of esports. This week we're really excited because we're able to continue that conversation, but really drill down in a specific area, and almost like a great case study to really understand more of what's happening in this space and how stories can be told and the way that brands fit in. Joining me today are Lindsay, Ullman. She's the head of business development for the NBA2K League. In her role, she's charged with defining the brand, growing the business, and that includes overseeing the NBA2K League partnerships and enhancing fan journeys. Matt Arden, former intern for the George Michael Sports Machine. He is joining us as well. Matt, what's your title? I actually cut and pasted the wrong part here. I was so excited about the George Michael Sports Machine thing.
Well, I'm obviously very professional. I'm taking this from the backseat of a car in a parking lot. So
that is not a reflection, by the way, of the success level of NBA 2K as a league.
Just so everybody knows, we lost power out at the house, and so I don't have internet. But I'm the head of content and media for the 2K League. And,
cool, thank you.
Partner with Lindsay on everything.
So I appreciate you guys really coming on and doing this. We will be taking your questions for people who are watching today. So please just leave those and we'll get to as many of them as we can over the course of our time. So as we kind of did last week, I want to start by sort of laying a foundation because not everybody is as familiar with esports and the range of esports and the leagues and the lifestyle stuff and all that. So if you guys could break down for us, what is the NBA 2K League and how does it fit in that sort of larger ecosystem of esports? Lindsay, go ahead.
Yeah, I can go ahead and kind of kick us off. So first of all, thanks Drew and Brian for having us today. Thanks Matt for getting really creative and taking it from his car. And, you know, I was feeling a little funny about doing this in my Brooklyn apartment, but you're making me feel better about it. So thanks. So the NBA 2K League, we're a joint venture between the NBA and Take-Two. Take-Two, obviously the producer of the game NBA 2K, which hopefully many of you guys are playing. We will be entering our third season with 23 teams. 22 of those teams are affiliated with their NBA organization. So I think the best way to think about it is if we use the Atlanta Hawks as an example, Hawks Talon is their 2K League team. And you'll see when you look at their brands, pretty clearly aligned, but definitely a delineation towards a younger, more modern approach when you look at who they are. And then our 23rd team is our first ever international expansion franchise. It's the Gen G Tigers, and they'll be based in Shanghai. And I think important for everyone to know, our league is based on the retail version of the game. So the game that many of you guys have picked up and played, we're actually playing a harder version of that game. The best way to think of it is devoid of any AI. So teams are made up of 6 players. 5 players playing on the court. They're all controlling their own avatar along with a 6-man, so someone who can swap in, just like on the NBA side. all of our games to date have been broadcast on YouTube and Twitch. So we are a digital first property. And then I think in terms of where we sit in the overall ecosystem, we know that sports gaming is a growing area, with 2K being a hugely popular game, over 90 million copies sold worldwide, collectively of NBA2K, and 7 million each year. So it's a growing audience, and it's one that we really wanted to find the best way to authentically integrate the NBA into esports. And so it was a natural fit for us to get started. And we've seen nice growth over the past 3 seasons. So it's been exciting.
Matt, what does it mean in terms of your league that you have that partnership with the NBA? So you have sort of the digital property and the traditional property joined together in that way.
Well, I mean, I think just fundamentally, right? We know hoops better than anybody. So I think you can trust that our game is in the way we play it, and the level at which we approach it, from everything from Lindsay and the marketing team on down to us and the broadcast team, and how we present the product to the world is at the utmost professional level. To Lindsay's point about how we're structured, one thing that's very unique to us in esports and gives you an idea of sort of the NBA polish on it is we build an arena every year for our games to be played in on a closed circuit, and we fly our teams in and they play in an arena where we also build a broadcast facility on top of it, and we push out a high quality, linear style broadcast. So I think just the gravitas of the league, we hold ourselves to a higher standard. So we like our product to be really, really strong.
I want to definitely get back to that broadcast aspect of this, because I think it's a really interesting part of this, and also a differentiation between sort of traditional sports and what you guys are doing at the 2K League. Who engages with the 2K League? Because I think maybe there could be some assumptions that it's basketball fans crossing over or whatever it might be. Is it, so who are these people? Is it lifestyle gamers, consumers of more traditional esports like League of Legends? Where does the audience come from?
It's a great question. And, I think first and foremost, our fans are basketball fans. So high entry point for us is just learning through our affiliation with the NBA. I think people are surprised when they watch their first 2K League game to see how high the basketball IQ actually is of our players. And you can see them virtually setting up plays, which the example I give most people is the first time I brought my parents to one of our events, they're a little unsure of what this whole esports thing is, and they were able to pick up on it almost immediately. But most importantly, they play 2K. And what we know about a lot of gamers is that they play to get better, and because they appreciate the high competitive ability of the folks who are playing. And so for us, it's a nice overlap of those two audiences, which is the people who are basketball fans, but also play 2K. I think what's been exciting for both Matt and I, and then I'll let him talk about this a little bit too, is just as we've come to better understand our audience, which is an incredibly diverse and multicultural one, that there's a lot of overlap with lifestyle. So high interest in sneakers and music. People want to know what our players are listening to on their headphones when they're walking in. They want to know what sneakers they're wearing. And by the way, our players care a lot about what sneakers they're wearing. Mm-hmm. And so for us, it's given the opportunity to really paint a slightly different picture of who an esports player and fan truly is.
Yeah. Matt, if you wanted to add to that, and then I had a quick follow-up when you're done.
Yeah, I think just to follow up on Lindsay's point, I think we really do break the mold when it comes to not only our players, but our fans. I think there are a lot of sort of stereotypes that exist within esports, and I think that we break a lot of those sort of it's really a very unique product with a very unique fan base and unique athletes.
And I would assume too, like what Lindsay's talking about in terms of the attention that players pay to little details about shoes and style and all that. I mean, and I can vouch for that as somebody. I cover the NBA in what I hope to have be my daily life again very soon. They care and they talk about it, and they know if they feel like their skill set's underrated or somebody that they think is garbage is better than them or all that kind of stuff. That integration that you guys have between the athletes who care and many of whom play the game, how does that enhance the product that you're able to put out as a league?
Well, I think just with anything, right? Authenticity and honesty
Mm-hmm.
minimizes anything, right? And so there's just, at its core, there's just nothing false about our product, our players, our fans, our entire offering. Um, and it leads to some really unique intensity. These players and these fans care in a very deep way and in a very visceral manner. And so we see, I mean, we get feedback from our players, we get feedback from our fans, and we take all that feedback too. But it's a very open communication exchange because of that sort of authentic environment, which I think makes us very unique, not only in traditional sports but in esports in general. It's you just can't fake authenticity, and that just drives so much passion and engagement.
From a from a marketing standpoint and a brand engagement standpoint, Lindsay, how does your demographic and your audience maybe differ from others across, because it's such a wide spectrum of people who engage in esports in one way or another, from the hardcore gamer to the lifestyle participant. Yep. Where do you guys fall in that? And do you think people make those distinctions perhaps as carefully as they ought to in terms of how they want to market and how they want to engage their brand in an esports property?
So to answer your last question first, I think it's something that brands should really think about, because there is this just general buzzword right now, which is like, I can't tell you how many times I get on the phone with people and we're on the phone because they want to learn about esports. Mm-hmm. And we think of esports the same way you'd say, like, I want to engage with athletes. You'd never say that and assume that every athlete who runs is the same as someone who plays football, right? And that's true for our fan base too. So when you look at our fans and even our players, I would say two things stand out that's slightly different than if you want to clump esports to general. The first is much more diverse. So we are highly multicultural, and I think that reflects in all of the content we create as well as everything we do from a marketing perspective. And that's why we do talk so much about lifestyle, because we know that that's a really high priority for them. I'd also say we're a slightly more mature audience. And I think that that comes from the fact that higher overlap between NBA fans. So super important for us. And I know we're going to talk a lot about brands and the ways to authentically integrate them, but I think that's super important for brands to really think about. Like, when you think about esports, are you thinking about just because you want to reach people who play games, who you think those are the people in their parents' basement, or are you trying to tap into a different sort of audience? And it's important to know who your fans are, and it's something we use across content and marketing.
And Matt, do you find often that you fight those sort of any misperceptions? Brands come to you with just that idea, with a bit of a skewed idea of what it is that you guys are doing?
Well, if I'm being completely honest, Lindsay and her team really sit on the front lines of those communications. So a lot of times I don't get to meet the ones that don't have.
Right, sure, that makes sense.
Once they come down the pipe to us, though, yeah, I mean, you definitely still have those sort of, I won't call them awkward, but we've all been in them, right? The pretty standard conversation points where a brand has a very specific focus based on some sort of preconceived notion or some sort of data set that wasn't provided by us, and sort of coaxing them into a conversation where we recognize our audience, we know what drives our audience, and how we can impact our audience through a compelling piece of content or through a broadcast integration that makes sense, that will put them in the best light. But I don't think those are unique conversations to any sort of advertising model. But Lindsay's team really is the one that probably helps them understand it before they ever get to meet me.
So along those lines, Lindsay, how do you encourage brands to best understand those distinctions? Whether before, ideally, I guess, before they look for their target within this space.
A lot of education. Yeah. A lot of education. And I don't say that in a bad way at all. I think it's important to ask those tough questions when you're talking about spending money with a brand, is to better understand who they are, what they're about, and what their core values are. So I would say about 25% of the conversations that I have holistically is just letting people know, one, fundamentals, like who are we as a league? What does that mean logistically? How do we work? But then also, what are our differentiating factors? And I think a word that likely came up in your webinar last week and will come up again in this one is community.
Mm-hmm.
So community really drives everything we do. And I mean, this is sometimes to Matt's chagrin, but we get a lot of feedback. And feedback meaning that our fans, and I've worked in sports for over a decade, mostly on the traditional side, and I've known fans and worked with them in a marketing capacity, but the esports community of fans take it to a new level. They basically not only want to voice their opinion, but they expect to be heard. And so I think that's something we talk with brands quite a bit about, because we want to make sure that we're setting them up for success.
Mm-hmm.
Because anything that comes across as inauthentic is kind of sniffed out almost immediately. So we want to make sure we're setting everyone up for success.
And I would suspect, Lindsay, too, that community, even with the overlap that you have of fans of the traditional NBA game, don't necessarily consume and behave the same in both spaces. You can't assume that just because an NBA fan does it here, they won't do it the same as a 2K fan.
No, I mean, the joke I would use is that people, I think maybe people do try and message Adam Silver, but I don't think they expect a response. People reach out to Brendan Donahue, who's our managing director and commissioner of the league, and absolutely expect a response. To Matt's credit, Matt is in our Twitch chat. And he doesn't go by an alias like I do. I'm kind of in there like hiding, and Matt's there as Matt Arden. So people know that the head of content is here and listening to their feedback.
That also, by the way, is not why he's doing this from a van. It's not some sort of witness protection program. He's not doing it for his own safety.
Not a vagabond.
No.
But I think actually, if I can, Lindsay's making a really important point in that, and for brands to sometimes understand too, that unlike traditional, linear outlets or cinema or any other places you can sort of have these integrations or brand conversations, esports really came from a grassroots operation from the fans themselves, and then, self-publishing and platforms that allowed those things to happen. And we're obviously coming in over the top with a really amazing offering and creating this league, but we didn't invent esports and we didn't invent these platforms. And so respecting how fans have been consuming and how they've been accustomed to building these platforms in these leagues, and understanding we as much as we love to come in with a really beautiful offering, we're learning just as much as we are creating. And the reason why I'm in the Twitch chat, and why all of us, and why Brendan responds, and why Lindsay's knows fans and knows players, is because we are learning and we're trying to be as authentic as possible, and trying to adapt in real time when we're doing things that are either really well liked and building on them, or maybe pivoting when we do something that everybody doesn't take to right away.
Well, that's actually a really good seg, because we're getting some questions in from the audience, and just pull out a little bit so I can see them a little better. One of the, in terms of how brands are integrating with the 2K League, the first question comes: do you find it's traditional NBA sponsors who are moving over and trying to do both? Is it sort of redirecting their broadcast dollars or whatever it might be? Where are your sponsors and your brand partnerships typically coming from?
It's interesting. I'd say our first season, we really started with endemic brands. And when you say endemic, you're talking about headset providers, you're talking about gamer chairs, and we're extremely lucky to have amazing partners in HyperX and Rainer who fill both of those categories. I think what's been interesting to me is all of the non-endemic brands that have entered the space. So we've had a lot of success with some of our partners like AT&T, Champion, who's our apparel partner, Anheuser-Busch, working with them on their Bud Light product, as well as Snickers. And I'd say the majority of the brands reaching out to us now are not NBA partners, and they're not endemic. Which is also a big misconception in esports, which is that you have to be a controller company to find a way to integrate. So I would say that is where a lot of those partners are coming from. And then on your other question, how we can integrate, and then I'll flip it to Matt. One, we're really lucky in the fact that we have authentic integrations, because sponsorship in the NBA is like this. So when you watch our games, there are natural places where we can integrate partners. So that's courtside rotational, stanchion, things like that happen within the game. But where we really bring value is the storytelling and lifestyle components that we've alluded to a little bit. And I think some of our best examples, whether it's AT&T's Locked In that Matt and his team worked on, or Champion and being part of their 100-year marketing campaign, I think those are some of the best examples. So I'll let Matt give a little more color to that.
Yeah, it really starts at the beginning, right? When Lindsay and the team form these relationships, to her point about it being communal, by the time we're at the point where we're developing a piece of creative, there's a really, really open and honest communication strategy already in place. And so we can have really, really strong conversations with our brand partners about what will affect our audience. And they've been really great about participating in the kind of storytelling that we want to tell without trying to, overtly push either a product name or a product, that needs to be purchased. All those things are coming out naturally anyway. And so Locked In's a perfect example where, AT&T expressed interest in being part of what we call IRL or in real life content. So content that happens off the court. And they've been a great partner because that content is happening naturally and organically anyway, right? The teams are behaving in certain ways. Rookies are interacting with veterans in certain ways. And we're not asking to color that in any way. We're just asking to cover it. And it's been great about lending a voice to it. And then in year 2, we get into like much deeper conversations about how they can help the production or how, they're just these really nice conversations. And so, to answer the question more specifically about what are the most positive feedback we've gotten, I think, the fans and the players understand what we're all trying to do together. And I think the most positive feedback has been in the B2B relationship because it's just been, it's been this really positive exchange of ideas.
Do you find that more traditional brands, and Anheuser-Busch, for example, and this is something we touched on a little bit last week, but I think it's a really an interesting point. How does their brand presentation change, or does it need to change for this audience, to kind of feel comfortable but also authentic moving into a space that might be non-traditional in that way?
I think we always want to understand each brand that we partner with values and making sure that we're finding the right partners and that we align from the beginning so that you're not really trying to do that square peg round hole situation where I put Matt and his team in a really uncomfortable position where they have to make something work in a really inauthentic way. AB are great partners in the fact that they're really interested in co-creating content. And so one of the things we're doing with them, we have our community ambassador who goes by Black Frank White, and he's actually going to be hosting a channel or hosting a show on Bud Light's Twitch channel. And so in that regards, we're talking 2K, we're bringing on our players, we're bringing on influencers in the space, and we're still aligning with Bud Light and what their goals are. The other examples that I would give is I think anytime a brand can authentically add value, and 2 examples that come top of mind for me for that. So we have a big focus on women in gaming. One of the things we haven't talked about is we're really focused on being a force for good within gaming. And one of those initiatives is on diversity and inclusion. We know that it's harder for women to get to that absolute top competitive threshold. And so we want to make sure that we are removing those barriers to entry. So we had a women's development camp this summer where we brought in some of the top 2K female players, and we brought in some of our coaches, and we did a whole 2-day long boot camp, for lack of any other word, for these players to get hands-on training. And AT&T brought some of their executives to talk about building an online presence and to speak about leadership traits, both ones, whether it's quote unquote on the court or ones off the court. And same thing with HyperX. They were actively involved there. And I think that anytime we can find those opportunities to align our values in that way, that's the best possible partnership.
Is there an assumption, do you think, that those types of things might not be available in the esports space? Like, that sort of boot camp designed for female, esports athletes. I don't know if that would occur to everyone as, oh, that's a thing. You understand what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I do. I think it is something that, we talk about misconceptions of esports. And I think one is that in some ways it can be true that it can be toxic. but we are really focused on changing that narrative and finding opportunities to show how we can lead in a different way. And I think that's really exciting. And it's something that probably not as many people are familiar with.
Mm-hmm. Another question comes from Jordan Kelly. You guys talked about some of your brand integrations now, but he asked the question, what partnerships have garnered the most positive feedback from the esports community and consumers? And I'll add to that, in that way that you guys get all that instant feedback, how does that shape sort of the way that you guys will partner with brands and find creative ways to engage with them and find that right place for them to be able to tell the kind of stories and deliver the kind of messaging that they want? Matt, you want to start with that? Obviously you're right in the center of that, with getting all the feedback.
Well, again, it starts with the initial conversations and the initial, business development side. But I think for us, when we finally, get to create a piece of content or get to create a broadcast integration, we're pretty mindful of that. It is a pretty immediate feedback loop, but it's also sort of an echo chamber at times too. So you can't look at the first 2 comments in the Twitch chat and assume that that's the overall, feeling across the board. But the truth is, we also are on the front end are very, very honest with our partners about the type of content we should make and what would be effective, because there is an immediate feedback. And you do want to make sure that you're being authentic. And so, to Lindsay's point about AB and BFW Live, that's a really great example of a piece of content or a storyline we were already developing, and they are now participating in it to enhance it, make it better, more exciting, bigger. But it was something we were already making for the community anyway on a grassroots level. And so attaching ourselves to storylines, attaching ourselves to products that are already sort of, gotten a little bit of a seal of approval from the community, and taking cues from what has worked in the past. A lot of times we develop ideas for brands based on things that we know have certain success metrics. And that's not to say we recycle ideas or that we don't come up with a fresh idea every time, but we do understand sort of the patterns of consumption and what has been favorable in the past. And we try to help everybody get down that path while also bringing as much innovation to the table as possible without completely shaking the system apart.
And Lindsay, how much flexibility do you find sort of in this environment that brands need to have in terms of, the lead times? You might run a commercial in a traditional NBA game or something like that, or NFL or whatever it might be. You have a long lead time, until the next campaign or whatever it might be. How does working in this space perhaps differentiate that experience? Do you need to be a little bit more flexible, a little more willing to pivot or try something different or tweak a concept to make it even better?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think fluidity and being somewhat flexible and trying things that as a brand you may not normally do is absolutely key. And I mean, I come from a traditional marketing and digital background, so I'm used to saying like, all right, 6 months in advance, we have everything planned. I have my brand guidelines and we don't veer from those. And so I really understand that approach. However, I think in this instance, to see success, to demonstrate that you've taken feedback from the community and just in general on the activation, that's what's going to determine how well it's received. So the brands who can provide guardrails, I would say, versus a absolute must do have been most successful, if that makes sense.
I mean, there are some, I know, and sort of as we were kind of getting to know each other and talking in anticipation of today's roundtable, you guys were sharing some stories about the ways that the sort of the flexibility of a brand and learning to understand the different structure of how you guys operate and what the league is like and what the broadcast experience is like, can open up opportunities. Matt, is that something that you can kind of address, just the way that the structure of the broadcast even can allow brands unique opportunities to engage that might not be available in traditional sports?
Yeah, for sure. I think so. It's 2 ways. One is through technology and innovation, and the other is through pivoting. And so I'll touch on both. And then one is that we as a league have gained success through being really responsive to feedback, to learning, and sometimes even failing fast and learning from it and changing the way we broadcast or create a piece of content. And so that's sort of a unique conversation that we take back to brands, that I hesitate to say experimentation, but we can learn as we go and iterate and innovate as we go, because we do we are new, we are fresh, and we like to try some things once in a while. And we're not afraid to pivot when we see them, not as sticky as other things. And then as far as the broadcast goes in particular, we do that through a number of different means. Again, staying active in the Twitch chat, integrating things like tag boards so we can bring in real-time social media conversations into our broadcast instead of using them later in post-game reports or things like that. Taking very real, live, active conversations and bring them into our conversation, or including them in our conversation to make everybody feel a part of it. And then another thing that we love is our overlay within the Twitch channel through Muxy, which Lindsay and her team have been great at developing. So I'll toss it back to her to sort of explain how that works. But from a broadcast tool, it's great because we get real-time feedback, but also real-time communication and rewards and offerings with our audience while they're watching in real time, which is really rewarding for both sides.
Yeah, I think Twitch is an interesting channel in general. And if you haven't spent a lot of time on it, I think everybody should, just because it's a completely different way to consume content. And I do think it's the future. Like, as we think about broadcast, even on traditional channels, this idea of interactivity has been around for a while, right? When Twitter came out, we started pulling in tweets years ago when I worked at the Hawks and throwing that into broadcast, right? And talking about, like, here's some feedback we just got from Matt Arden. Here's what he's saying about the game. And I think Twitch takes that to a whole new level. So not only is there an active chat going on with everyone who's there, so people are throwing out emotes, which are basically emojis, and commenting the entire time, both on the game as well as in between each other. But in addition, you can create what's an extension, and that it basically lays on top of your broadcast, and it gives you added functionality. So it provides deeper stats. There are basic sort of fantasy components of it. So you can pick which player you think is going to score the most. And we know that fans who interact with that spend 4x the amount of time watching the broadcast. And it's ultimately just because they're that much more engaged. And I would say the opportunities to use those extensions are kind of endless. Like, those are two very simple extensions, and one that I think you'll see even traditional broadcasters start to test. But there's endless options, such as, imagine if you could click on a player and you could purchase that jersey right there directly on the broadcast. So the interactivity, it's not just about feedback. I know we've been joking about feedback, but it's really a holistically engaging experience.
Sorry, Brian.
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Because what was interesting was, when you talk about brands and integrating in our broadcast, what's interesting is when I first came in a little over a year ago, it was what I realized very quickly, it's very meta esports broadcast, and ours in particular. It's a bit of a Russian doll. You've got the basketball game going on, which has integrations and all kinds of unique opportunities for sponsors. And then you have our broadcast on top of it, which is our players playing the game, which is another level out that we're covering with a full broadcast angle as well, which again has unique sponsorship opportunities, unique mentions in the broadcast, unique brand placements, all kinds of unique things. And then you've got this third broadcast happening at the exact same time, which is the real-time communication. That's the Twitch chat, the overlay, things happening on Twitter that are being brought into the broadcast. And so I think that's actually really, really unique to us, is that there are it's very meta. And if you can dig in and sort of drill down through the levels of our broadcast, you can, as a brand in particular, you can touch a consumer in so many different ways with so many different touch points that mean something to how they're viewing our product.
And that actually gets to the question I was about to ask, which is sort of the range that's available. And you touched on a lot of them. And I would think another one is just sort of, things that mirror a little bit of what you might see in an NBA game, the banners and the stanchions and things like that. So it's a very wide, it sounds like a very wide range of ways in which brands can engage in a product like the 2K League, if I'm understanding correctly.
It's a very wide range. And I think that the partnerships that are most successful look across both a media component, which is what I would consider that sort of courtside rotational stanchion, traditional branding pieces, to some of these more engaging, whether it's grassroots and getting involved in our community relations, or content and stories that we can tell. I think that's where these unique packages bring the most value to brands, because it does a little bit of everything, right? You're getting that media exposure, but on top of that, you're getting to tell really unique stories that then we actually encourage brands to use on their channels as well.
Is that I think something, is that something you think is common to esports generally, that if you're willing to kind of go in, and we'll talk about partnerships here in a second, and storytelling, that you can find the right niche for you, whether it's your game and your league versus another one, but that the opportunities are a little more expansive than you might think as a brand?
For sure. I think right now what's happening is esports, even before the past few months, was a little bit of a buzzword. And it was like, it reminds me of when social media started and everyone was like, we got to be on that Twitter. And no one really knew why or what they were using it for, but everybody knew that they wanted to be on it. But I would say esports, the opportunities are really wide, and the games offer completely different audiences. And so I would say not to be scared to explore different opportunities and understand what best aligns with your brand.
I definitely want to make sure we save some time to talk about storytelling here. Whether you're talking about the 2K League, you guys have something called the 3-for-all tournament, which I'll let you guys explain. How would you break down the types of opportunities for storytelling, the range of ways that brands can engage for that, in something like the 2K League, under that larger umbrella?
I almost want to throw it back to Lindsay, because I think too, there are so many levels to it that I oversee broadcast and content, so I handle one faction of it, but I think that there are so many more ways to do it. I don't know, Lindsay, do you want to, you guys?
Listen, I think there's a ton of ways. So whether you are most interested in social and short form storytelling to long form IRL content, it really runs the gamut. It's ultimately about knowing what your goals are going into a conversation with a brand. And then I always think in conversations like that, it should be a two-way conversation, right? So a lot of times people have thoughts going into any sort of partnership of what they want to do. But I'd say always listen to the other side and what works really well for them. So one example would be, we know that people like esports because they want to get better at the game. So there's a lot of brands that it makes a lot of sense to align with sort of a how-to content that could live in 10 different ways across different channels. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, for sure. Do you have some examples that really stick out to you, whether again through the 2K League, through the tournament, whatever it is, because again, the range of brands, if you go look at your website, the range of brands from the endemic to the traditional is huge. Absolutely.
Sure. So we have everything from Snickers, which we have Hungriest Player to Watch, which is just fun. And, we take some liberties there, and we'll also integrate some of our great casters as well, because everyone loves the Snickers and no one more than our players. So that can show everything from gameplay to just having some fun with Dirk or Scott, who are actually covering the game. I would say to HyperX, we'll listen in using their headsets to sounds of the game. So those are both two sort of short form pieces that we may have done. And then Matt talked about this a little bit before, but with AT&T, we did a longer form IRL piece called Locked In. And those episodes range from 10 to 20 minutes, truly deep storytelling. And we haven't talked a lot about the background of our players, but I think that's one of the things people are most fascinated by, because you have everyone who was pre-med in college to, I think I shared with you, Brian, someone who's a classically trained artist. And when I say artist, I mean quite literally an artist, who played on one of our teams and now is actually on the business side of one of our teams. So it really, you can do everything from short and quick, and that aligns with your broader brand strategy, something that looks more like what you run in terms of media, all the way to those deeper storytelling pieces that give you the opportunity to expand a little bit broader.
Before we go, we're about 5 minutes away from the end of things. I kind of want to broaden the discussion out a little bit. We've touched on it, especially when the regular traditional sports shut down. I mean, everyone is stopped. The thought was instantly, aha, this is going to be a golden opportunity, a golden moment for esports. And then I think it's part of what prompted some of these conversations. We all have to stop and say, those of us from traditional sports, wait, what are we talking about when we talk about esports anyway? What do you think the opportunities are specifically around, the current events related to esports, whether it's your game in your league or the ecosystem more broadly? I don't know which one of you would want to start with that. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Just because I think first and foremost, we're just in a unique period of discovery and awareness if you're not aware of us, because people are looking for things to watch and are looking for entertainment. I think where we have a unique opportunity is that we're not a terribly confusing game to jump in on. And this is not a knock on any other game. I just think it's something unique to us. If you turn on Twitch right now and watch, a bunch of other games, you as an outsider may not understand how the game is actually played. We play basketball. You can watch one of our games immediately and jump in and know that this is Team A versus Team B, and they're running 5-on-5 basketball, and they're names that you functionally recognize because they're obviously part of NBA franchises. So I think that's a unique possibility for us because we offer something it's rated E for everyone, no red blood, fun to watch, family friendly, and we are very close to something that is currently unavailable that we all hope comes back soon. I think we can fill that void anyway. And so I think that's why we were so quick to jump into the 3-for-all tournament and obviously pushing towards starting our season with remote play. I think the hardest part for us was just pivoting like everybody else, to creating cloud product, or cloud broadcast solutions and learning how to create content from everyone's living room. But I think that the fact that we're a traditional sport that is easy to follow is a really nice bonus for us right now.
Is there a sense that the product can be a replacement for the traditional product that's missing, or is it more of an opportunity to get the eyeballs and then introduce them to what it is that you're doing?
I certainly don't think we are trying to replace the NBA. We believe people can be fans of both. And understand some of those things that we've hit on, like the way our broadcast is different, that it can be really interesting to someone who's only ever watched traditional NBA. And we have seen people kind of get sucked into, I'm thinking of some of our most active commenters on Twitch, and some of them are definitely NBA fans who started watching our broadcast, who've gotten kind of in the mix on a different product. So I would say we're not trying to replace in any ways. We love that people can enjoy both and know that it's slightly different.
And the flip side of this question, Lindsay, and I'll start with you, is what are the challenges that people might not think about, again, both with your league and what you do with 2K, but also just in across this spectrum of esports, with this assumption that, it's a perfect time. What are the challenges that esports is facing right now in the environment that we're working in?
I think the biggest one is under a normal season, and I didn't really talk about this, each team lives in their home market. So Hawks Talon lives in Atlanta. They live and practice there, all in one house. I like to say it's kind of like the modern real world. However, they normally fly and compete out of our New York City studio. So we're faced in a time when realistically it's not safe for people to fly and all compete out of New York. And so that's been one of our biggest challenges. And you're seeing it not just for us, but you're seeing it across other properties. For anyone who's watched SNL, who's filming remotely, or even John Oliver, who's still covering the news from his home. I think it's interesting to see the way people approach that. We are lucky that our players were in market and practicing when this happened, which has enabled us to test things like the 3v3 tournament. And Matt can talk about that from a broadcast perspective, but I think we're all learning it is no easy feat to pull things off when everyone is in different locations.
Yeah, we're doing it okay here.
This is the best example.
Right, perfect.
If you play a traditional basketball game in the backseat of your mother-in-law's car, then yes, we're all facing the same challenges. But I think that to Lindsay's point, the biggest challenge for us, at least on the broadcast and content side, is we can no longer share space. So, obviously we film around our players, and so we can't be near our players right now. The added benefit is that our game happens in a virtual space. So once we figured out virtual broadcasting, we could then begin to very earnestly ramp up the efforts to start our season again, because we can participate in a virtual space. But we did have to completely 180-degree pivot from being literally 12 days away from our arena being open and having fans and players enter our arena to play our game, to playing in 23 different living rooms and broadcasting it from a hub in the cloud across 5 or 6 different living rooms running that production. So what's happening right now, we face obviously very unique challenges, but the truth is it's allowed us to innovate. And so I hesitate to say we're thankful for the opportunity, because this is obviously a horrible time for everybody in the country. But I am proud of our team for being able to rise to the challenge and find the innovation and find the joy in the thing that we really like making for people. And so that's been, I think it's brought our team closer together, and we hope that it shows in the product when we do launch our season.
Before I let you guys go, we were able to cover a ton of ground here, I think over 45 minutes. Any final thoughts, things that we didn't get to that you think are important in terms of people understanding the moment that we're in, the ecosystem of esports, of 2K League more generally? I'll let you both have a second here to do that. Lindsay, go ahead.
So my final thoughts would be, would encourage everyone to spend some time on Twitch, see what it's like to watch a different type of broadcast. It's really entertaining.